we move on to the next item on our agenda, which is a joint debate on minimum rates of pay in the transport sector. We have an oral question to the Commission on employment conditions, including minimum rates of pay applicable to the transport sector and compliance of the German provisions with the European law on the minimum wage in the transport sector. A statement from the Commission. We'll start the debate with Mrs. Ulvskog. 5 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. President. One of my strongest memories from the electoral movement last year was a telephone call I got from a priest in Sweden. She was saying that she was despairing about the social, terrible situation in the car parks outside her town. There were rows and rows of lorries waiting for new loads to carry. During these times, the drivers live in their trucks. They have problems with hygiene. They light fires there. They use small camping stoves to warm themselves in the cold Swedish winter. They have nothing to do. They just have to mark time. And this is undignified. Now, we know that there are problems in the haulage industry in terms of competition. And people who are actually carrying out domestic trips but being paid under poor wages and poor conditions, and they're forced to suffer with those poor conditions, and the serious hauliers are pushed out of the market. When it comes to a question of a minimum wage that's adopted through collective bargaining, well, there are some countries who do this. Some countries, however, allow foreign hauliers to be subject to minimum wages and certain administrative provisions. For example, if they are subject to prior authorization, and this happens both in transit, international and cabotage operations. In the Committee on Employment and Social Affairs, I'd like to put the following question to the Commission. First of all, which provisions of the EU and indeed national law does the Commission consider be applicable to lorry drivers and other workers who provide services through or in another member state regarding employment conditions and applicable law in the question of transit in a host member state's territory? To what extent may domestic regulations be applicable to foreign road transport operations? My second question is, how does the Commission view such transport operations in relation to employment conditions and the law applicable to employment relationships at the time of the service being provided, and inter alia when it comes to the directive on the posting of workers and the Rome I regulation? My third question is, which measures does the Commission intend to take in order to protect the social rights of workers in the road transport sector? The EU's objective to have a deregulated internal market will never be brought to fruition unless the European Commission respects the problems, the serious problems that exist and have been caused by European legislation. The Commission is working on a review of the transport rules. Really, you can't turn a blind eye to these problems. You can't just carry on pressing on with liberalisation. Measures need to be taken to counter social dumping and unfair competition. That needs to be put in place. That will be decisive for the EU's project as a whole, both when it comes to regulation, but also when it comes to the democratic content thereof.
Thank you, Mrs. Ulvskog. I'd now like to pass the floor to Ms. Bulk on behalf of the Commission.
Mr. President, honourable members, socially responsible road transport services, which are at the same time safe and efficient, are the key pillar for the creation of a fairer and deeper internal transport market. The market which is shaped by people for people, and that was my promise, which respects workers' rights and contributes to developing society and economy in the EU. Each and every symptom of social unfairness and disloyal competition must be combated. However, it is the prevention which is the best means of redress. Let me stress that the Commission welcomes the introduction of minimum wages on a national level. They are fully in line with the social policy committed of this Commission. However, it goes without saying that the national measures on minimum wage applicable to the transport sector must be applied in a manner which is fully compatible with the EU law, notably the Treaty principles on free movement of goods and freedom to provide services. This implies, inter alia, that the measure should be non-discriminatory and that any restriction of such freedom should be justified, having regard to the principle of proportionality. The Commission understands that the first two questions raised go to the schema recently introduced and operated by Germany. In this regard, I can inform you that the Commission is thoroughly assessing the German rules on minimum wages and their impact on the transport sector and on the proper functioning of the internal market, in particular taking into account the information provided recently by the German authorities in response to the Commission's inquiry. Therefore, I am not yet in a position to provide, at this stage of the procedure, precise answers to the questions of the European Parliament. The legal assessment is complex, as it involves basic EU treaty principles, in particular the fundamental freedom just mentioned, but also several pieces of legislation, notably by the Posting of Workers Directive. In addition, the measures also need to be analysed in the context of regulations which liberalised road transport market, Regulation number 1072/2009 and 1073/2009. The Commission will decide on further steps based on the results of this comprehensive assessment and inform the Parliament of its position as soon as possible. Mr. President and honourable members of the Parliament, let me turn to the third question and share with you the Commission's vision to improve social and working conditions in transport, in particular in road transport. The Commission is fully committed to promote fair social standards, fair working and business conditions. These three elements are crucial to create a sound framework for more and better jobs in the sector. It is also of utmost importance that the current legislation, both at the EU and at the national level, is fully and equally understood and applied across the EU. This concerns all stakeholders, including Member States, shippers, drivers, freight forwarders and other operators active in the transport area. With a view to completing the existing framework in light notably of the aspects just mentioned, the Commission is currently considering new measures which could be presented in a road package in 2016. Such package would combine social market and enforcement-oriented initiatives. The package would provide European answers to European challenges. It would seek to balance the needs of better efficiency and safety of transport services with those of ensuring that transport workers can fully and equally benefit from their rights stemming from the existing legislation. The Commission is also carrying out a targeted review of the Posting of Workers directives. Without prejudging the outcome of the ongoing analysis, the Commission intends to report on its findings towards the end of this year as part of the broader labour mobility package. The Commission welcomes the intention of the EU social partners in the road transport sector to further enhance the social cohesion in the sector. excuse me, we stand ready to support them and to engage with them, in line with the Commission's commitment to a strong social dialogue. Thank you very much for your attention.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. We'll now hear from Mr. Casa. 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. The matter we are facing now is something that has worried the European sphere for some time. We have two parties involved, and they both have valid arguments in this European dialogue. Those who are against these conditions argue about the free movement of services and products, which is important for the internal market. We can say that if drivers are paid according to the geographical location, this can lead to less competitivity and act against these freedoms. Whereas the position by some member states quote the principle of subsidiarity as their main argument. This legislation has remained the prerogative of member states, especially when we refer to minimum wage. In the case of different wages in the transport within one state can lead to less respect to rules and can affect even safety on the roads. Colleagues, workers' rights are very important for our Parliament, but also the principle of subsidiarity is so. So I would like to ask the Commission to consider these 2 points carefully. While I thank for its contribution, I hope that we will find the best solution to the benefit of all concerned parties. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Jutta Steinruck. When a lorry driver is driving in another EU country, he must comply with the rules of the road there. No one would question that. The same should apply to minimum wage rules. We don't have rules in place across Europe. Member states are entitled to set the terms. We have this confirmed through Rome I and countless ECJ rulings. We want to see same wage for same work in the same place across all sectors. Companies would not be destroyed in this way. What would destroy companies would be unfair competition and social dumping. That greed to make profit is the root cause of this problem. It is protectionism, but what we need to do is protect workers from exploitation and decent companies. For many years, I have been in close contact with haulage companies and lorry drivers throughout Europe. Really what I've seen is modern-day slavery. Drivers crisscrossing Europe, spending the nights in their lorries, having to deal with basic needs at petrol stations, and we're talking about wages of around €300 a month. This should not be par for course in Europe. We need minimum wage, no exception, no loopholes, minimum wage applicable throughout the territory to everyone. I hope that the Commission will sign up to that approach and send out a clear message against social dumping and undercutting, which can destroy companies. We need fair competition in Europe. Thank you.
Sí. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. There is a blue card for you. There are a number of blue cards, but I would point out that we are running very late, so I'll only take one blue card. I do apologize that this is the case. Will you accept the blue card? No, you're not going to accept the blue card.
Señor Sulik.
Mr. Sulik, you have the floor.
Thank you for the floor. Minimum wage already in itself is, in economic terms, a nonsense because it touches the most vulnerable, those whose skills are less valued than the minimum wage itself. These workers are basically forbidden from working. It's clear that minimum wage increases unemployment, especially when it's set as high as the German one. Germany might have forgotten that 10 years ago it was the sick man of Europe. But if Germany decides to harm its economy, it's their problem, it's their matter for them to decide. But Germany is abusing the minimum wage in order to irregularly close its market. This is in breach of the single market. The law on minimum wage is set in a discriminatory manner because by overly burdening subjects, it's only aiming at foreign hauliers, not domestic, which are not subject to these conditions. In addition, daily allowances do not fall into this category, which means that the foreign haulier ends up paying more than the local, the German one, which is another case of discrimination. This is highly incorrect, especially from a country who is very strong in export, because it's profiting from a very weak euro at the back of other European countries. Therefore, I ask the European Commission to act accordingly, and I ask the Commission to force Germany to adapt its minimum wage and to set it only at those who are subject to German law. That means, in the case of transport, it should be valid for cabotage, but not for export and not for import. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. Ms. Labajova.
Thank you, Chairman. It is with much concern that I look at the impact of the German minimum wage legislation on European employers, especially in the transport sector. Every state has the right to adopt their own minimum wage law, but such legislation cannot be implemented against the EU's basic principle. What happens here goes contrary to free market principles and free movement of people and services. Germany's measure is unfortunately a symptom of growing protectionism in the EU. The danger is that if Germany succeeds, a chain reaction will follow elsewhere. It is a financial burden as well as much extra bureaucracy, and it contradicts our common principle of smart regulation. It's the 21st century. Are we serious to require EU's companies to send documents by fax and make work records in German only? In addition to these aspects, I can also see that it is a political problem for Europe. It is a step backwards. Invisible barriers between the states are being raised in Europe. This is against the spirit of a united Europe and against the sense of our work. This morning, I met Czech transport operators participating in an international protest against the German law here in Brussels. I was asked, are there any news? Especially the small ones may not survive. And what could I say? Nothing. Weeks of questions waiting for answers and no solution in sight. You know, do you know what's the worst for the businesses? It's uncertainty. This is unacceptable. It persists for 3 months now. So my question is, when do we give the answers, Madam Commissioner? And please publish the German answer that was sent to you 3 weeks ago. Thank you.
Gracias. Señor.
Thank you, Mr. Le Yarrick.
Madame la Commissaire.
Thank you, Commissioner. Here we are dealing with a serious vice that undermines European integration. Competition takes precedence over social rights progression. Germany has introduced a minimum wage. Neighbouring countries and the Commission has put pressure on Germany to not apply this minimum wage to road hauliers. As a result, European workers are facing extensive social dumping. We cannot accept this rationale. The Commission and the Parliament should support any initiative designed to harmonise social and labour laws upwards. We need to tackle social dumping, have a minimum wage, review the Posting of Workers Directive to ensure equal treatment for all workers in the European Union. It is incumbent upon us to ensure social progress. That is far more important than this deadly entitlement to competition. Thank you. Thank you. I would ask our guests not to indicate support or opposition to the statements made by the MEPs. Ms. Reintke.
Commissioner, President, ladies and gentlemen, why do we need the European Union? Well, if you put that question to European citizens today, many of them will say that the EU is a project of neoliberalism, untrammeled competition, and something for banks and big companies. The social aspect has fallen into the background and profit maximising has been brought to the fore. What we're looking at here is the minimum wage in the transport sector, which is a critical point to show that the European Union is much more than just that, because it's this fight on the minimum wage which makes one thing clear. And when it comes to assuring social rights and fair working conditions for all citizens in Europe, we still have a long way to go. The debate has shown the imbalance between a European integrated single market where services can be provided Europe-wide and the social standards that should be applicable across the continent to guarantee fair conditions to workers. This is something the Commission should pick up on, put forward some decent proposals, get social standards of a minimum nature for the transport sector and guarantee that. We as representatives of the citizens of Europe have to work together with trade unions and civil society and work to make sure that a social and fair Europe becomes a reality. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. Ms. Agea.
Grazie, President.
Thank you, President. Colleagues, we talk about Europe. Well, Europe talks often about a union of markets, a single market, economic and monetary union. I think we talk too much of this without necessarily knowing what we're talking about. I think that we should consider ourselves to be a team, but within that team we don't seem to be following the same rules. And that's unacceptable. And I think we have to be brave enough to say it to the public, that the problem affecting hauliers here specifically, but it's a social dumping issue which is something we're seeing across the board at Europe, and that's because what we don't have is uniform regulation and legislation across Europe, and because what we have is a proliferation of different domestic legislation. So we shouldn't be surprised. We shouldn't come here and say, oh, we have to protect lorry drivers and the internal market, because all of us are both right and both wrong. But until we decide that we'll have uniform, certain rules that will guarantee at European level that what happens to workers on the one hand and the markets on the other, then this is the only thing you can expect. Yes, a fairer market, fine, but when will we come up with the rules for that fairer market? Because either we start to provide answers which contain a kernel of certainty, or we'll be talking about the same problems again and again and again. But when it comes to in fact providing answers, and I imagine that the ladies and gentlemen up there are directly affected. We could ask them not to applaud, but we should be protecting them. So when will we decide to regulate the market and to provide specific rules? Then maybe we can say that they shouldn't applaud, but I think it's their interests that should be respected here. Thank you.
Please do not be unnecessarily provocative. Please respect the decision taken by the President in the chair. Ms. Meyer.
Thank you very much, President. President, on the 1st of January this year, Germany adopted a minimum wage, which is to be applied to all workers or any worker carrying out work in Germany. If you come from the Netherlands, we've got a big transport sector. About 45% of the transport from the Netherlands goes through or to Germany. The problem is not the level of the minimum wage. The problem is the massive administrative red tape and burden that comes from that, and the extra costs involved with that, and that people who come who are earning lower wages have to be compensated in Germany. Now, we've seen a freedom brought in to bring in this sort of legislation, but we would like to benefit from that freedom as well to help our lorry drivers, and we would like to see the negative effects of this legislation taken and got to grips with. We shouldn't allow Netherlands companies to be disadvantaged by that, otherwise they ought to be compensated. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. Mr. Marinescu.
Thank you very much, President. Madam Commissioner, the minimum wage is an economic measure that each member state is free to apply. It is a measure to be applied to the nationals of that particular state or citizens who work there with an individual labor contract. In no way can it be applied to workers employed by a foreign company in the field of services, especially in road transport. The obligation of companies to pay drivers for international transport with at least minimum wage applied in Germany for the period when they drive in Germany is clearly infringing the rules of the internal market and the service directive. The obligation of companies to keep separate accounts and to make them available to German authorities is totally outside any kind of national or European legislation as a requirement. Such a measure represents a dangerous precedent. Other member states have already announced their intention to apply similar measures that will create big problems on the single market of the EU. The new rules outside European regulations imposed by other member states to drivers, as well as the extraordinary fines provided by the legislation of such countries, including Germany. It is quite obvious that such measures can be regarded as protectionist measures. I ask the Commission to continue the infringement procedure and to reach as soon as possible a result to limit the losses registered by transporters in an important number of member states, including Romania. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. Mr. Liberatsky.
President, Madam Commissioner, we're talking about new German law, so-called MILOG. This law has been applied on a territorial scale, and it is in contrary to certain EU laws. First of all, it's against Article 56 of Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. The second, against Article 8 of Rome I Regulation. The third is against Article 1 of Directive 96 concerning the posting workers, and against Article 9 of Regulation number 1072 on common access to the international road haulage market. Trucks and bus drivers perform international carriage operations on the German territory only on a temporary basis, so they are not workers posted in Germany. These drivers still remain employed by their own regional employers and international travel is a core feature for the work they do conduct. So I would expect, Commissioner, not to promise us new laws. I would expect you to execute the already existing laws. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Liberatsky, there is a blue card for you. Do you accept it? Mr. Uzegi.
Thank you, President. I was standing in the rain together with Mr. Liberatsky, taking part in a demonstration by employers and employees from 5 member states. This is the petition. I'm going to send it around. This was the petition handed to us. Do you agree with me, Mr. Liberatsky, that, of course, we all want higher wages for our drivers, but this solution, the German solution, will render them unemployed, make them unemployed, and will not lead to higher wages. In Hungary alone, this could affect the jobs of 45,000 or 50,000 people. Thank you.
I fully agree there might be job losses, but just one more explanation. It's not true that they earn 300 euros. A work of a lorry driver in Poland, for instance, it's 3 aspects. Fixed pay, it's around 500 to 600 euros per month. Then you have variable aspects between 400 and 600, and then the so-called daily allowance of 45 euros per day, per every single day when they are abroad. So you have to make a total. The total is around 8.5 euro per hour.
Señor Poremba.
Mr. Poremba.
Pani komisarz.
President, Commissioner, Mr. Liberatsky quoted treaties and directives in relation to which the new German laws, they are totally contrary with those stipulations. For instance, the freedom of provision of services, the freedom of movement of goods and services, etc., etc. I think we should all now ask the Commissioner to give a clear position from the European Commission, also as regards all the answers that you have received over the last couple of weeks, because we want to have some clarity now, because we believe that the new German regulations on minimum wages are in a direct and dire breach of all European rules. And there is another issue now. In most member states, the minimum wages is regulated by national laws. So we cannot have one country, Germany, imposing their level of wages on other countries. Please pay attention to this. So the role of the Commission is of key importance now, and I hope that we in the Parliament will soon get a clear position from the Commission whether or not the new German rules are contradictory with the treaty stipulations, and we should do our utmost to have those new regulations suspended.
Gracias.
Thank you. Ms. Meissner.
Herr Präsident.
Thank you, President. Ladies and gentlemen, Commissioner. Well, normally I'm very proud of the way we do things seriously and fundamentally in Germany, but I think they go way beyond what's necessary, being so focused on details. Listen, I've nothing against the minimum wage per se. As the Commissioner said, each country is free to decide on that. That's subsidiarity. That's fair enough. However, this is the first time, I mean, we're not the first country who's introduced a minimum wage. Many other countries have that. But it's the first time that people have been so pernickety with the details and set out in the smallest detail in the transport sector, as my colleague said, that you have to send faxes in German setting out exactly which company is going to be spending how much time on German territory. and that is just to ensure that they're paid the German minimum wage. I think that goes far beyond what's necessary, and I think it goes beyond European law as well. You said that this is still being looked at. That hasn't been concluded, that exercise. But how can it be fair for the internal market where we have different situations in different countries? Of course, we have different levels of minimum wage. Of course, that's the situation. Of course, we don't want lorry drivers to be disadvantaged. We've heard from other people as well. We have the petition and the demonstration. Is that really the way to go to help them? I think we should take a different path to help the lorry drivers. Really, I believe that Germany's opened Pandora's box because it's the first time that logistics and transport's been included here. It's a European issue, a European policy. France is now moving in on the act. They want to do the same thing, and other countries are going to join the club as well. What is a haulier going to do going through 5 countries? In Poland, you know, it's a low wage, 11 in Germany, 9 in France, etc., etc. You know, it's going to be such a confused situation. Who's going to check all that and monitor it? I think this is a perfect case where they've gone far beyond what is necessary and useful, and I think we shouldn't accept this. And I do fear that small and medium-sized enterprises, ones that we always want to protect, that these people are going to have to give up and shut up shop. That surely should not be what Europe wants.
There is a blue card from Mr. Stu. Would you accept that? Yes, go ahead.
Ja, vielen Dank, Herr Vorsitzender. Ich habe eine
Thank you, President. Well, I did raise a blue card because Mrs. Meissner said that France is going to join the club, is going to get on board. Well, I'm just wondering if that's actually the case, Miss Meissner, because the French Republic, up to 2010, had this exact same law. They withdrew it, and it's only now that they're considering bringing it back. So there's a fundamental difference between what is fact and what Mrs. Meissner just portrayed. And maybe I would just like to ask you if you understand that that's the case. Well, let's look at why France withdrew that law. Well, it's obviously because it was counter to EU law. I say it once again, that is the danger we're running. If we start this game in Germany and France joins in, then how is a haulier going to come from a different country paying lower minimum wage because they have different costs? How can they keep up with that? That means only the German and the French companies will be able to survive because they're the only ones who can afford to pay it, not the others. That's not Europe. We want to have jobs across Europe. We want people to have income across Europe. That's what we should be looking for.
Thank you. Mrs. González Peñas. Good evening. Single markets often become a tool to devalue labour conditions. The transport market, very important for economic and social development, is fragile, becoming more precarious because of unfair practices such as delocation of companies to countries with lower wages. The legislation we have doesn't legitimise social dumping. The principle of freedom of choice in labour contracts, which is in Roma 1, is a falsity. Labourers and workers can never choose their labour conditions. The European Union should be encouraging an upward and not downward levelling of labour conditions, working conditions. Minimum wage can't mean reducing minimum wages in some countries of the EU. We need to encourage economic balance between different countries of the European Union, because at the end of the day, this is the root cause of these disequalities and differentialities and differences. Now, other countries have different labour conditions, and we need to ensure that it's not always a downwards trend.
Señora Deli.
Thank you, Mrs. Deli.
Commissioner, I would welcome the presence of many EU trade unionists from the transport sector here in the chamber listening to us. Social dumping is a hellish cycle, pitting workers against one another, favouring larger companies and disadvantaging smaller companies. We have savage competition, undercutting labour costs because workers in this area are particularly mobile. We have Ryanair in the air sector, for example, not playing by the rules of the game. This is modern-day slavery, exploitation of undeclared workers. Commissioner, we all agree in this chamber that we have a real problem with social dumping in the transport sector. We need action. We need a European labour inspection agency to check and punish unscrupulous employers. We need a blacklist of such guilty companies, minimum wage, minimum standards for working conditions, and we need a minimum wage across Europe. We need to act more swiftly. We need rules on cabotage in the road sector. We need to clarify the rules in the maritime sector. We need to look at the German and French legislation changes that have ensured that road hauliers will be paid the minimum wage applicable in those countries when working in those countries. Europe needs to face up to its responsibilities and come up with a joint response here. If we don't take action now against social dumping in this sector, then it will poison the entire European project. Thank you.
Mrs. Deli, there is a blue card from Mr. Jakovi. Would you accept that, Mr. Jakovi?
Gospodine predsjedniče, htio bih uvaženu zastupnicu pitati kada već govori o potrebi.
Thank you. You talk about the need for harmonized wages in the road haulage sector. What about harmonizing salaries for doctors? Surely they should be paid the same given the important job they do. It would be far more important that they have a harmonized wage. We all live in Europe. We have different wages and salaries and different problems in different countries.
Monsieur le député,
Honourable Member, I was quite clear. I said that this was an opportunity to introduce a minimum wage right across Europe, not for different sectors. A minimum wage should be applicable to all sectors. That is the type of social Europe we would like to see in place. Same salary for the same work right across Europe.
Señor Lundgren.
Mr. Lundgren.
Thank you. Well, I have something that none of you members have, and that is 30 years of experience sitting behind a wheel in a lorry. I know exactly what the problems are, and I know why the problems have come about and how they're being dealt with. In Sweden, we are seeing the market being completely swamped with companies who are undercutting us. Swedish companies can't cope. We're looking at sometimes 500 euros a month. You know, that's what we get for 2 days' work. In fact, we get more than that in our daily allowance than they get for a month. And that's ridiculous. And the cabotage regulation from the EU is at fault. It's absolutely outrageous what's being done in our name. Looking at the minimum wage, is that a path to take? I don't know, but Swedish companies are going bankrupt one after the other. We are losing taxpayers' money as a result. We're losing tax income as well. We hear the defence that the foreign workers have a wage which is very good compared to what they earn at home. Well, how does that help? They're not in their homeland, in their home countries. They have different costs that they have to pay. And the Commission is going to have to rethink this whole issue. Some may call it protectionism or nationalism if you're trying to protect your own companies, your own workers. I call it ethics and morals and decency if you demand fair conditions for jobs in our countries. This social dumping has to be stopped. What is the Commission going to do? You have to have some clue of what's going on, surely.
Gracias. Señor.
Thank you, Mr. Fontoulis.
Κυρίες και κύριοι συνάδελφοι, συμμερίζομαι και εγώ τις ανησυχίες.
Thank you very much. I would echo the concerns that have been raised, particularly in the transport sector. We have a lot of examples of exploitation of workers and infringement of their rights. Unfortunately, the problem isn't limited to this. We have heard complaints of employers putting pressure on their workers to extend their working hours, and then there not being a second driver as there should be. That's for bus drivers as well as for freight. So the way in which the internal market has been implemented does make it possible to infringe people's working conditions and for there to be exploitation. For us to change that, we need radical solutions which in practice do show solidarity of the Union. So we should be adopting a fair policy, both in terms of working conditions and wages. This is how we tackle this phenomenon, and we should go further, I think. Not a Europe of exploitation, but a Europe of peoples.
Thank you, President. Well, I have to say that the arrival of the German minimum wage is something I warmly welcome. I think for social Europe it's extremely important that all member states of the European Union enjoy a minimum wage. The minimum wage will be different from country to country, but in the longer term, and I know that is a time which is too long, they'll converge. But if everybody has a minimum wage, then we know what we're talking about. Secondly, in agreement with Mr. Marinescu, I see problems with the managing of the minimum wage for transit traffic. You're making the situation far too complicated. There's far too much red tape linked to this. And I'd be curious to see what the procedures of the European Commission will be on that particular front and how you're going to draw lessons from that. Now, on domestic cabotage in Germany, I assume that the German minimum wage will be paid across the board for transport in Germany by non-German companies. Once again, that constitutes a step towards having a level playing field. Now, I know for some people that this all is moving far too slowly, but having a social and competitive Europe would mean this needs to be introduced. President, other issues in the sector, we in the Netherlands have car parks where at the weekends you've got 50, 60, 70 mainly Eastern European drivers who have their little camping stove. You know, they need to do their biological needs there as well. And we hope that you, Mrs. Bulc, that in the road package you will dedicate some attention to these issues, because workers in Europe have a right to an honest wage and honest social provision. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. Mr. van der Kamp, there's a blue card from Mr. Farrier. Will you accept it?
Caro colega.
Thank you. How do you explain how these measures will affect SMEs who don't have the kind of capacity to finance them? These measures, I think, were intended for major companies, including Dutch ones. Don't you think that these measures were aimed at just, in fact, benefiting German companies? Do you not think that this is just another protectionist measure? Thank you.
President, the answer is clear. Even small and medium-sized companies need to pay the basic social conditions, social wages. Presumably, if they can't do that, it's not a viable company. If you're a small and medium-sized company and you need to survive on $3.50 an hour, then I think we're really affecting the core of social Europe. And let's think of our electorate. The support for Europe is on the wane, and the social chapter, I mean, Mr. Juncker said by way of introduction, there is more attention that we have to dedicate to this particular area.
Gracias.
Thank you. Ms. Blinkevičiūtė.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Commissioner, I would like to ask you if it is right for national laws in the transport sector of one country to be imposed on other countries? On what basis? Don't they distort competition? And will they not create a precedent for similar behavior in other sectors? Fragmentation of the market and unfair competition pose a very great threat to the drivers from Eastern Europe, including those from Lithuania. They cannot compete under the requirements imposed by Germany. Such a situation can lead to bankruptcies, to loss of jobs and income. And besides, in all of this situation, we must first of all focus on the workers and their rights. They work hard and must be properly remunerated and socially protected. Madam Commissioner, I'm addressing you once again. The Commission, together with the Member States, must do all that is possible to ensure that transport sector workers can keep the jobs and improve their social situation. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. Mrs. McIntyre.
Mr. President, I'm very concerned to see the principle of subsidiarity properly upheld. We must respect the competence of Member States and their freedom to set their own minimum wages and address their own social policy issues as they see fit. Under no circumstances should this debate be used as an opportunity to call for an EU-wide solution or an EU framework on minimum wages. These are exclusively the preserve of the Member State and should be addressed at a Member State level. The Commission, as guardian of the treaties, must defend freedom to provide services and the free movement of goods. This is key to the proper functioning of the single market. Now, the new rules in Germany require pre-notification, extra record keeping, and I think that such conditions have placed additional burdens and administrative requirements which are of grave concern to small businesses. And I sympathise with these concerns, but it's crucial that we're very clear as to what we're asking the Commission to do and what things the Commission has the competence to do, and interfering in minimum wages isn't one of them.
Mrs. McIntyre, there is a blue card. Will you accept the blue card?
I would like to ask the colleague, what do you think? Is this decision not directly related to the protection of the national market?
My concern is that we maintain the single market. Indeed, we still haven't completed the single market, so that is important. But it's equally important, and possibly more so, that the rights and responsibilities of Member States and the subsidiarity principle is recognised by Europe. And I'm very concerned that Europe tries to do more and more. We listen to the commissioners say we must do the things that we can do better together, but not get involved in detail. My view is that social policy should be the prerogative of the Member States.
Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Chairman. Commissioner, dear colleagues, I would like to underline that Germany, of course, is in its full right to adopt a minimum wage. The minimum wage in itself is not the problem. The problem is that with the minimum wage follows piles of bureaucracy that are creating a wall around Germany for foreign operators. And this is not in compliance with the Single Market Act. I do not understand how Germany can decide what should be the wage in different countries. According to the treaty, Germany just does not have the competence to do this. Some people are claiming that the German application of the minimum wage is one of the most serious attacks on the single market since the adoption of the Single Market Act. These protectionist measures create barriers all the way down Europe. This is very serious and very worrying to me. It is the Commission's responsibility to protect the single market. From what I've heard so far, I'm not convinced that the Commission meets its responsibility in this regard. Having said this, though, I noticed that the Commissioner Bulc stated that national implementation of different laws should be in compliance with the different EU legislation. Therefore, I have a very simple question to the Commission. Will the Commissioner today give this House a guarantee that it will do whatever it takes to protect a smooth and functioning European single market? Thank you very much.
Mrs. Tonais, there is a blue card from Mr. Kramer for you. Would you accept it? Mr. Kramer.
Over 20 countries have introduced a minimum wage in the European Union. They are all in favour of equal pay for equal work at the same place. No differentiation. That must be respected. I am delighted that Germany has finally introduced a minimum wage. That must be respected. Abuse is growing, social dumping is increasing. If Lithuania, Latvia were to deal with Belarusian lorry drivers only, that would be social dumping. We need equal pay for equal work at the same place.
Coming from a country where the social partners are actually doing the collective bargaining, I'm not against a minimum wage, but it's up to the partners to decide what should be the level. And I do not think that Germany can decide what should be the level for Danish workers working in Germany. This is, as I see it, not an issue that Germany can decide. As I understand the European legal framework, Germany does not have the competence to decide on things like that.
Gracias.
Thank you. Ms. Konečná.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, although the EU has had many successes with the single market, this new German law about minimum wage goes in contradiction with it, which is remarkable, especially at a time when we are trying to boost economy through improving the investment environment. And instead of removing obstacles, we create new administrative barriers. I am happy that German workers have their minimum wage at last, but I am afraid that the German government has abused this to gain a competitive advantage and distort the free movement of services in the internal market.
It would seem we've got a technical problem with the interpretation.
A ver si ahora sí reciben.
Are you getting it now?
Por favor, continúe.
Do continue.
The decision of the German government would go against the interests of Czech transport companies. And it would also involve a lot of administrative burden, and that would undermine the free movement of services. And it is only applied to foreign transport companies. It would mean a two-speed Europe, and in effect it would also mean the blockage of the labour market. The European Commission should take a stance whether or not it's going to apply equal rights to all member states or whether it is going to take its orders from the German government. We know that we should apply minimum standards for all workers in all of Europe, including the minimum wage. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Grazie, Presidente.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. Colleagues, in its proposals, Europe is forgetting to look after its own citizens and its businesses, and it's also trampling over all our rights. Now, there are certain benefits to the single market, but we have to get over certain differences that there are when it comes to salaries and benefits in different countries, and they damage competition. In Italy, like in Germany,
there are transport companies coming in from Eastern Europe who, thanks to lower wages in those countries, can undercut our prices and therefore produce unfair competition vis-à-vis German or Italian companies who continue to struggle and are eventually forced to close their doors. So how can we guarantee the European single market and ensure workers' rights at the same time? Now, as the Five-Star Movement in Italy, we have proposed restoring certain minimal rights to citizens and workers who have Italian citizenship, and we want certain wages for work carried out. Now, to reduce the gap with certain countries, we need to now come up with rules in Europe which take account of where businesses do their businesses and ensure a level playing field in terms of competition. We need rules which are based on reciprocity. We can't build Europe by bringing some member states to their knees. Thank you.
Señor Mann.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mann. Thank you, Mr. President. Now, of course, freight transport is the cornerstone of the European economy. 75% of goods in Europe are transported on road. It's €8.50 an hour minimum wage in Germany. So that's not somebody that everybody's happy about. There are all sorts of obligations for some of these smaller companies, but we do need fair wages. We need to stop social dumping. We need to protect those companies that treat their employees fairly. There are a lot of criticisms have been leveled at this. We don't want new walls in Germany. We had enough of one. There is a minimum wage for hauliers, for heavy goods vehicles. There are checks, and any trucks which are unloaded in Germany, then cabotage is applicable. Commissioner, you said that the complicated rules should be checked. We all agree with that. We all need legal security, and we also need to preserve the subsidiarity principle. I'm very concerned about the kind of impact that this could have, and you've got to look at this very carefully. We've got to prevent any distortions of competition which would be to the detriment of workers and smaller companies. Thank you.
Yes. Señor Mann,
Thank you, Mr. Mann. There's a blue card for you. You accept? Very good.
Thank you very much, Chair. I've heard many times the term of social dumping, but never ever a definition of this has been presented here. And you know, no one is offering service below the price of profits. So I would like to ask you for a definition. What social dumping for you means?
It's just a question of fair payment, but there are a number of different possibilities. You drew attention to one in Germany. We've got minimum wages, but not everybody can accept. The main thing is that people think they've done a job and are getting paid. Another situation we're hearing outlined here that people feel is exploitative. We need a strong social dialogue. We've got that in Germany, and we've got a good tradition of social dialogue. We can achieve that, and then I think we can achieve a critic. You need a good social dialogue elsewhere in the European Union, because I think that way we could reach the kind of consensus that we need. Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Revol.
Merci, Président, Madame la Commissaire, mes chers collègues.
President, Commissioner, colleagues. Social dumping is making workers poorer and is damaging the European project. It needs to be fought firmly. The internal market and competitiveness can't be used as a pretext to question the improvement of working conditions in all countries, and I welcome the decision of the German government to implement the minimum wage for transport workers. Now, we're not defending a country here, we're defending an idea. In December, the European Parliament showed its determination when it refused to vote in favour of an act that made a wage difference. It didn't make wage differences a serious crime. Now, to conclude, let me recall that the implementation of minimum wage for cabotage operations, which are clearly covered by the Posted Workers Directive, are clearly also in European law. Road workers need to comply with the wage, need to receive the wages which are in line with those wages received by all workers in the countries where they carry out their cabotage operations. We have laws, they need to be respected. Thank you.
Señor Vistisen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vistisen.
For Dansk Folkeparti der ikke nogen tvivl om.
Thank you very much. For the Danish People's Party, we do not have any doubt as to where the real problem is. The real problem is the right to self-determination. And for us, this is a national prerogative when it comes to working conditions and wages and salaries, and how the welfare state is organised. The EU should not be meddling in such areas. And this right to determine the conditions on the national labour market means that everyone has to abide by the rules. If they want to work and receive wages in another country, therefore Germany is perfectly entitled to introduce a minimum wage. However, when it comes to control methods and inspections, I think you can discuss that. However, the core of sensible EU cooperation is that there is proper respect of member states' sovereign decisions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Riquet. Thank you, Mr. President. Madam Commissioner. Transport and road transport is rather special. And of course there's a big difference between transit and cabotage. This has been pinned onto the Posting of Workers Directive, and that has had some rather random consequences, negative consequences. First of all, it's bad news for TIR drivers who are either shamefully exploited or see their jobs destroyed because national companies lose thousands of jobs. The second reaction is the measures have been adopted by member states has a serious impact on the functioning of the internal market itself. Thirdly, there is uncertainty for the institutions, and that's clearly the case for you, Commissioner, today. So I would urge the Commission to tackle this matter and to adopt a legal framework that is specific for TIR, for international goods transport, so as to protect their rights, to ensure proper functioning of this important sector of the Union. Don't forget that 72% of goods transported in the EU are transported by road, so it's an important part of the single market. So uncertainty and an unsteady hand, it can no longer be tolerated. Thank you, Mrs. Morin-Chartier.
Monsieur le Président,
President, Commissioner, now this subject is an eminently European one, i.e. road transport. I mean, without damaging SMEs, who, as we know, across Europe are the businesses that create jobs, we need to get certain explanations as to what's going on. We need a distinction between transit and cabotage activities here, and you need to be clear on that subject. The second point where we need information is the link between the work we have done on the Posted Workers Directive and the current organisation, which is the way that current transport workers are organised. We need clear explanations on this. Some of my colleagues have said a legal framework, because we can't go down the slippery slope of social dumping and unfair competition between businesses. But what I'm hearing tonight during this discussion is that we've moved far further than that. We've moved away from discussing Europe, we've gone back to national debates, and everyone's trying to defend their corner. We need the Commission to be a social Commission, as Jean-Claude Juncker promised us, and there you need to take a step forward and be firm.
Gracias. Señor. Thank you, Mr. Christensen.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I can wholeheartedly agree with what has just been said. All of us in the Western countries have introduced our methods in order to improve the situation on the transport market. And it could well be that there's something amiss with the current rules, in the sense that no individual member state really knows how the rules which apply should be applied. What is cabotage? What does it mean to be domiciled or headquarters as a company? And I think that the Commission really should sit down at the table and work out common rules which are workable and which everyone can then abide by, so that there is a level playing field and proper fair competition between member states. My assumption is that the purpose here is to be able to operate into another country, at which point you should accept the rules which apply in that country. That's what it says in the treaty. But what we need then is rules which we can apply and abide by. Thank you very much.
Gracias.
So thank you, Mr. Złotowski.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you very much, Chair. Commissioner, Mr. Chairman, we've heard many times the appeals to solidarity, many wonderful words about the European integration. We said how wonderful the integrated market is, and we are talking and we are paying lip service to the full freedoms. But when it comes to the trampling on the one concrete example of the freedom of movement, then all we are told to do is to sit and wait. The German government introduced certain rules on minimum wages, and I'm sure the intentions are very laudable and are very good. And we all agree that, you know, for a certain work you have to be fairly remunerated. But when you include in those rules also workers from other countries, this hits them very hard, and this undermines the freedom of movement and freedom of providing services in other countries. So that is going to mean that some people are going to be laid off. So when you adopt rules like this, you attack, in fact, the freedom of movement and also the reputation of certain transport providers from Poland.
Von unseren deutschen Freunden.
And just a word in German. I'm now speaking in German, and I would call on the Commission at their earliest opportunity to declare the new German law counter to the treaty, because we must send out a signal that the Commission does not accept any breaches of the treaty such as this. Thank you.
Por favor, que sean más breves.
Please stay within your speaking time, ladies and gentlemen. Otherwise, we will keep on building up more and more of a delay. Mrs. Jazłowiecka.
Dziękuję, panie przewodniczący.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Today we are not talking about rational solutions that are in line with the treaties. We are always talking about this vaguely defined concept of social dumping, which has led to introducing certain rules that run contrary to the treaties and the freedom of movement. And fines, exorbitant fines are being applied to those transport operators that do not apply those minimum wages. Of course, certain companies use their competitive advantage, but that does not mean that they use social dumping. Sometimes you have lower wages in a certain country because the level and the living standards in those countries are lower. So we cannot talk here about social dumping, because no company can run a business below the profitability level. So I think the problem here is not introducing minimum wages in particular member states, but the problem is when you try to apply those rules to people from other member states. So we have a chaotic situation here, we have lack of clarity, and this all has been the result of the rules introduced by Germany. So we are expecting clarity, at least from the European Commission. We want the Commission to say clearly to what extent the minimum wage regulation from Germany can be applied to people from other countries. Thank you.
Gracias. Señora.
Thank you, Mrs. Senalova.
Thank you, President. Dear Commissioner, colleagues, the debate about the application of the German law on minimum wage does not only have the legal aspect and the fact that there's no legal certainty as of the 1st of January for road transport companies and the administrative burden. All that needs to be dealt with as soon as possible. And in this aspect, I'd like to appeal to you to clarify the situation and to apply European law equally. But the context of this debate is far deeper. Somebody calls it social dumping. Somebody highlights the fact that the competitiveness is undermined due to higher wages. But the fact that we have free movement of services and the internal market does not hide the fact that there are huge disparities between member states. The German wage is almost 4 times higher than the Czech wage, and it's therefore to apply equal rules, and we have to live with these disparities.
Thank you. Mr. Toshinovsky.
Mr. President, I would like to join the colleagues who strongly criticize the decision by the German authorities concerning the minimum wage. If this system applied only to German carriers, it would be only Germany's business. Unfortunately, this dramatically impacts businesses from other countries that are either forced to be in breach with the domestic law or face high fines from German authorities. I am disturbed that some calculations indicate that this may be a matter of liquidation for certain companies. Europe is based on the basic principles of freedom of movement of goods and services and people between member states, and here those principles are being breached, and we do not want this to be a start of a trade war, and that's why I would like to urge the German government to immediately withdraw these provisions and the European Commission to look into this. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. Ms. Monteiro de Aguiar. Thank you, Mr. President. Good evening, Madam Commissioner, colleagues. And obviously, in the matter in hand, the minimum wage is part of a broader discussion on the main obstacles to the development of a road haulage market for Europe. And of course, it's got a serious consequences for peripheral countries such as mine, Portugal. And also this is going to affect economic growth and the increase or growth in exports. I think it's essential that we get some kind of legal security for hauliers, and we also need a demanding regulatory framework, a tough regulatory framework. There are 2 substantive issues. First of all, the lack of proper inspections and monitoring of cabotage. Secondly, differences in the implementation of certain provisions, such as, for instance, the ban on regular rest time aboard vehicles, such as happens in certain countries like France. We must avoid activities shifting from one member state to another so as to evade taxes, particularly on labour. The Commissioner talked about fair working conditions, and it's good that you did so, because it's essential we achieve this. We need to preserve the social and labour situation of European workers whilst respecting the principle of subsidiarity. And I'd like to ask the Commission whether they are willing to carry out a proper reform of the road haulage sector in Europe. If so, when? Because we need companies to be able to compete on a level playing field, and we need their workers to have access to fair working conditions, not in every country in Europe, not least Portugal. Thank you. Mr. Simon, next, please.
My briefing note from my excellent assistant says, in capital letters, complex issue. And the Commissioner, when she opened the debate, said the legal assessment is complex. And you'd think, to have listened to the debate tonight, that this was a complex issue. But it's not complex at all. This is an incredibly simple issue. We're asked to believe that unless this measure is contested, the haulage industry in northeastern Europe will collapse under the weight of the costs. But Comrade Liberadsky said, in passing in his remark, that actually the average effective wage for truck drivers in Poland is 8.5 euros per hour, and the cost of these vehicles is 100+ thousand euros, and the diesel is thousands of pounds, and the tolls are hundreds of euros, and the notion that this cost can cripple these industries is ridiculous. The Posted Workers Directive is clear. You pay the rate for the job in the country that you're doing business.
Gracias.
Thank you, Mr. Barakov.
Good evening.
Thank you, President. Why should we turn the German companies into monopolists? There are minimum rates of payment, and they have to take into account the rates of payment in each member state. If the employers in Bulgaria, for example, have to pay those rates, the rates paid in Germany or France, this will kill the transport sector in Bulgaria. This cannot be taken into account. This cannot proceed this way. In the interest of the national economies, the minimum rates should be defined by national legislations, and payment for the lorry drivers should not be subject to centralized regulations of the Commission. The main rule of the European Union is free movement of goods and workers. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you, Mrs. Cluner.
Thank you, Chairman. And I agree with the concept of a minimum wage. I think it is very important, and I'm glad that Germany has introduced such a scheme. However, different states have different rates, and the cost of the minimum wage in Germany will be different to that in Ireland, different to that in Czechoslovakia, different to that in Bulgaria. And in individual states we have different approaches to wage levels, and indeed to taxation, and cost of living can vary. So, and I do know and I do understand there is unfair treatment of workers, exploitation of workers. That should not happen. But we can't have one country setting itself up as a judge and jury in this whole area. And I would urge the Commission that in the absence of policy in this area, we get the kind of situation that we're discussing now. And it's important that that void needs to be filled, and it needs to be addressed. My main concern in this whole issue is I've been contacted by Irish road transport operators who are concerned at the level of bureaucracy, at the level of red tape that it will involve for them. It will add certainly to their costs. It will discourage them from crossing Germany. They will seek maybe alternative routes, increasing their costs again, and ultimately increasing the costs to the consumer. So I think it's important that we have a moratorium while we address the situation, but ultimately it has to be decided on an EU-wide basis, and I don't think we can have one country dictating how we operate in this area. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. Mr. Ertug.
Ja, vielen Dank, Herr Vorsitzender.
Thank you, President, colleagues. I think this debate is a complex issue, certainly, and it also reminds us that at core we have got the after effects of simply different standards across the European Union, and that's the basic point. Low wages mean lower costs for the hauliers, and that means they can order a competitive price and get the business. And of course that's a clear competitive advantage for countries which have got lower standards. And I'm also a little bit surprised at those who are saying that the German minimum wage is higher and should not be applied to others. However, the hauliers in that country want to operate in Italy or in Germany. In other words, when the hauliers are able to extract profit from operating in Germany, then no one complains. I come from the border between Germany and the Czech Republic, and there was criticism from the German FDP because they are influenced by the unions. They are happy to base their companies, headquarter their companies. They've got a mail drop just the other side of the border, and they're happy to employ nationals from the other country, even if the actual operations take place in Germany. Now, I think you can take different views on this subject, but we've got to at least be honest and say to the Commission, look, Commission, we want a European approach when it comes to the definitions. What is cabotage? What is cabotage? What is transit traffic? And this has not been very prominent. What is cross-border transport? What about a haulier going from Prague to Germany, loading, reloading, and then going back again? If we can get those definitions clear in our heads, then we can get a compromise. Thank you.
There's a blue card for you, Mr. Ertug, from Mr. Balsitis. Do you accept?
Blue card.
We are old friends with Mr. Ismail from the last time in office, and this issue that we are discussing tonight proves that there are a lot of unsolved issues within the European Union. That's definitely not the main issue. I mean, social dumping, it's not the main problem here. When we entered the European Union, we had to open our markets when we all knew that economic situations and taxation systems were different, and the minimum wage system was different. We've got minimum wages in Lithuania as well, but the thing is that Germany, with this particular law, is trying to compete with the carriers from other countries to make their market freer. Don't you think, my colleague, that, just as you've said, we need to set things straight to make sure that the main basic principles do not collapse in the European Union, that is trust in each other? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Sigmantas Balčitis. It is right what you say. However, I think that when I said we've got to be honest and frank, we need to get a solution at European level. The problem would be solved if you had companies, undertakings, passing on a contract from their country of where they're based, and if they were obliged to pay the minimum wage. That would solve the problem. And I must just add that we're not talking about work in Lithuania or Romania or Hungary. We're talking about work which is being conducted. The operations are taking place on the territory of the country which has introduced its minimum wage. And I think that basically you cannot object if that member state increases its minimum wage. I know that it's not without its complexities, but we have got to work our way through it. Thank you.
Mr. Jakiewicz.
Thank you very much, President, Madam Commissioner. The solutions introduced by Germany has hit very hard the countries such as Poland or other eastern countries. This means risk for our companies, and this also means that many people are going to be laid off, and it's a very dangerous precedent. Because when we allow for such rules now, today, similar rules are going to be introduced tomorrow in different sectors, and this means an onset of a new era of protectionism. So, an effective end of freedom of movement, a main pillar of the European Union. This pillar is going to be undermined. The transport companies in Poland have spent years and years to build their reputation on the European market. Many companies went to the wall. We built a very modern fleet of cars, and many goods are being transported to Germany. So we cannot allow for this huge effort to be undermined by just one bureaucratic decision from the German side. We want to have clear rules. We hear that, you know, Germany is so worried about the minimal standards of social dumping and so on and so forth. This is a clear case of dumping, of protectionism.
Gracias.
Thank you. Mr. Schulze. President, Commissioner, since the 1st of January 2015 in Germany, we got a minimum wage of €8.50. Not everyone's happy about this in Germany because it's going to affect middle-sized and small companies particularly. Now, what we're about here is not the €8.50. The problem is the bureaucracy that is attached to it. €8.50 is applicable to transport, to transit. Now, we've heard what people think about this legislation in Germany, and we've heard very heated reactions from the Minister for Labour in Germany, though she extended this further to at the request of Brussels. So Brussels has indirectly done something to reduce bureaucracy. I think it's good that Brussels is taking a look at the bureaucratic muscle we have in Germany. The Commission has proposed that the procedure will be further checked. I could suggest that minimum wage routes are reviewed. Particularly, we've got to do something about the red tape that attaches. Finally, this shouldn't generate distortions, competition, or any obstacles to the single market. Thank you.
Gracias. Miren, hay diversas peticiones, hay tarjetas azules.
Thank you. We have a number of requests for blue cards, but I'm afraid we're not going to be able to give satisfaction to members. We're well over a half an hour behind schedule. We've given the floor to many members, and many members have availed themselves of blue cards, so I'm afraid we're going to have to call a halt to it. Thank you. Mr. Bach.
Herr Präsident, Frau Kommissarin, bei der Frage...
President, Madam Commissioner, in the topic before the House today, this is not a purely national issue, nor is it the introduction of a minimum wage in a particular member state, which is at stake, nor is it the level of the minimum wage, even though wage policies, wages and salaries, is of course a European issue because it affects competition, freedom of movement, fair competition, and that means that yes, there is a subsidiarity dimension, but it's in the competition area as well and other things, and that's where the Commission should be taking up a clear position. I'm in favour of a statutory minimum wage, and it's a pity that there are some member states where that doesn't yet exist or it's not properly implemented. Social dumping has taken on tremendous proportions in the transport sector, and of course we've got Rome 1, we've got posted workers and all the rest of it, but they're being bypassed or not being inspected, not being enforced. And on top of that, many member states are taking their own measures and making their own interpretation, placing their own construction. I must say, Madam Commissioner, I'm not entirely convinced. Perhaps it's too soon, and so I look forward to the road package which we've been promised. Given the critical situation, how does the Commission, what's the next steps for the Commission, and what is in the pipeline? Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next speaker is Ms. Sander. You have a minute and a half, Madam. The floor is yours.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, President. Commissioner, the issue that we're looking at this evening is key for the future of European road transport and more generally for our view of a social Europe. Now, as you know, international haulage companies can at the moment load and unload their trucks in a transit country prior to reaching the country of destination. That is what is known as cabotage. However, these haulage companies do not have the right to the same minimum salary or social protection as their colleagues do in the country that they're crossing. But their work is the same and it's taking place in the same country. In my country, France, you have the most cabotage going on in Europe, and lorry drivers face direct competition on their national market from lorry drivers from other European countries, which has led France to lose 20,000 jobs in the transport sector over 5 years. We're going to be soon voting on a measure in France on this. But I think we need a European solution which needs to fill the current legal gap in Europe. We need to establish rules for cabotage and create a specific regime for highly mobile workers. Yes to fair competition, but we don't want to see social dumping. Thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, we'll start the Catch the Eye procedure. There are 17 applications, and unfortunately, because of the lack of time, we'll have only 6 names on the list. Firstly, on behalf of the EPP, Mr. Andor Deli has the floor, please.
Many believe that minimum wages is when we're talking about minimum wages, we're talking about subsidiarity or European rules. But there have been and there will be differences in wages between the member states of the Union. Don't get me wrong. We believe that every member state should have the right to set minimum wages, but we also expect the member states to do so without undermining the fundamental values of the European Union. We are only talking about road haulage now, road transport. There's a lot of extra bureaucracy, red tape involved for road transport companies, especially SMEs, and to hide behind the excuse of social dumping is just not fair. Small companies can go bankrupt overnight because of these rules, when on the other side we are trying to reinforce the SME sector. We expect the European Commission to act and act fast, and this is the only solution we can put an end to this problem, and this is the only way we can strengthen the European market in road haulage. So we expect the Commission to do what it is supposed to do. It should be the guardian of the treaties and the principles.
Thank you, sir. The next speaker is Mr. Balsitis.
Colleagues, the law adopted by Germany is not reconcilable with the logic, neither with the EU rules. We have been talking about this the whole evening. It amounts to intervention into laws of other countries. This law is not aimed at fighting the social dumping. In fact, it's a law which prevents companies, especially companies from Eastern Europe, carrier companies, to enter that country's market. This will create tension in these countries. Russia is already applying restrictions to hauliers from European countries. The hauliers made a lot of effort to reshuffle their itineraries. Therefore, it is hard to understand how EU member states at this difficult period in time are creating additional difficulties for companies from other countries. This undermines the principles of fair competition and solidarity.
Mr. Marius.
Madam President, the situation in the European Union, given the crisis, is now really turning everything on its head. the countries in the peripheries are supporting a minimum wage, and they're investing in cabotage. Germany was always in favour of opening up markets, in favour of Bolkestein and services, against cabotage and against the adoption of a minimum wage. And now, of course, when the hauliers in the peripheries are taking advantage of the internal market, Germany finds the pretext of its minimum wage and engages in protectionism to protect its market. And this is one of the opportunities that the countries on the peripheries have been able to avail themselves of. I think that we must stop unfair social dumping and make sure that the rights of workers are properly respected. But clearly there's something wrong, something is rotten in the state of Denmark, as Shakespeare said, and this is one of those occasions where things have worked out rather well for countries on the peripheries. Thank you.
Mr. Jakovčić is the next speaker.
Poštovana gospođo
Madam Chair, as far as I have understood, you will give the floor to all political groups. Mr. Jose Faria has asked me to speak instead of me. Mr. Jose Faria wants to take the floor instead of me. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you, colleague. Thank you, President. Senhora Comissária, caros colegas, temos de ter claro que aqui estamos a debater.
No, it's clear that we're not just discussing a social economic issue or one just exclusively limited to transport sector. This whole issue is about European integration. That's because this measure runs counter to European legislation. In the building of the internal market, we were all concerned to ensure that the principle of mutual recognition of national legislation was respected, whilst also abiding by fundamental freedoms. This measure is a step backwards, very clearly. It also violates a fundamental principle of the freedom of circulation, and that there's a different system for workers in transit, particularly a minimum wage standard. Now we've got to contribute to an integrated European policy which helps build the European single market, not the opposite. This is a fundamental to European project. I'd like to conclude that we're not opposed to this measure if Germany undertakes to pay for the difference in salaries that this will entail for SMEs. Thank you.
Mr. Christogonos.
Mr. Christogonos is the next speaker.
Madam President, it's a great pity that the European Parliament is debating this very important subject of the minimum wage in a way which does not do justice to the seriousness of the problem. We're simply looking at minimum wages in the road haulage sector in one country, but we're forgetting the general issue, which is underpinning decent work in all member states. And here we're looking at this from the point of view of competition rather than the broader issue. If we want to protect fundamental rights in line with Article 2 of the treaty, then I think we should have a general principle that no one in any country should be paid wage levels which are not a living wage or not a decent level of income. Because what we are seeing is people forced to work for starvation wages, particularly in the programme countries, and we should change those rules before we focus on
Finally, Mr. Rope. Mr. Rope has the floor.
You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I think a lot has been said today in this discussion tonight, viewing from different perspectives, and I think that on the one hand we need to clearly state that there are huge disparities in Europe, and we need to draw up a clear plan as to how to bring our systems closer. And I think the European Commission needs to send a very clear signal to Germany in this instance, saying that Germany is just stepping too far, and Germany needs to put a moratorium on this particular law, its application on other member states. And then, in the meantime, we need to come up with our own system and put it in place. Thank you.
Köszönöm szépen, képviselőtársaim!
Thank you, colleagues. In the end, Commissioner Bulc has the floor, please.
President and honourable members, thank you very much for your very straightforward comments. I have heard you, and I will make sure that these are taken into account by the Commission in our current assessment process, as well as in its further work on enhancing clarity and consistency of applicable social and market rules, in particular as part of the road package. And by doing so, we will take a more comprehensive approach, as many of you have called for. I would like to underline that the establishment of national minimum pay rates is a positive development. But of course, the national measures, while protecting workers, must respect EU law so as to preserve the proper functioning of the internal market with all the benefits it brings across Europe. We shall also draw lessons from this experience. The Commission will continue to monitor ongoing developments. It reserves the right to intervene against unilateral measures that unduly restrict fundamental freedoms such as free movements of goods, workers and services. In the pursuit of constant improvement, we will also be looking into the most appropriate measures to create efficient, safe and socially responsible road transport services, where people are the heart of the EU transport policy. Finally, I would like to stress one more time that the Commission will inform the European Parliament on the outcomes of its assessment of the compatibility of the German measures with the EU law as soon as possible. But please understand that we need to follow the EU procedures, and that takes time. But at the same time, I assure you that the Commission will continue to act as a guardian of the EU Treaty and EU law. Thank you, and see you again as soon as possible on this topic.
I thank you, Commissioner, for these closing remarks. I'd like to inform you colleagues that by this we close the debate of the matter. Is it a matter of procedure?
Na tej sali jest ponad 30%.
I just wanted to say that there are 30% of women in this house now, but you know, you've given the floor only to men in the procedure of Catch the Eye, so I feel as a woman very discriminated against.
Dear colleagues, the sensitivities may be even stronger in this late hour. We all feel sometimes to be disadvantaged, but unfortunately the selection of the speakers is not according to gender but according to application. Who is the first to flag up is to get the floor. I know it's difficult to accept this and the time is very short, but I'll forward your remarks to the presidency. So thereby we close the debate. According to our agenda, the next point is Council and Commission statements on the International Roma Day and anti-Gypsyism in Europe, and the recognition of the Roma genocide during World War II. Ms. Jourova has arrived on behalf of the Commission. The Minister has been here as always in the benches. Also my colleagues are present. So first of all, the Minister on behalf of the Presidency has the floor.
You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam Commissioner, honourable members. It's a privilege to address this session today, and today we discuss an issue that goes to the heart of European values, of who we are and what we stand for. So, as we prepare to celebrate International Roma Day on the 8th of April, it is opportune to reflect on the situation of Europe's largest ethnic minority, on their circumstances, progress made and the challenges ahead. Not only it is opportune, but it is also necessary, because Europe's success in improving the situation of Roma communities is a measure of our ability to promote integration and tackle social exclusion everywhere. That is why, 4 years ago, the Council established the EU framework for national Roma integration strategies. This framework invited Member States to come forward with strategies to promote Roma inclusion in 4 key areas: education, employment, healthcare and housing. And just over a year ago, on the 9th of December 2013, the Council added fresh impetus to this drive by adopting a recommendation on effective Roma integration measures. There has been progress. Member States have stepped up their efforts and are taking action. The European Parliament has been very instrumental by keeping the topic on the agenda, by assisting with ideas and discussion, as well as by reminding the Council and its Member States of the need to further progress on the issue. But this is a long road, and major challenges remain. It is regrettable that in 2015, many Roma still live in conditions that are simply unacceptable. They still face deep poverty and social marginalization. Many lack basic access to housing and health care. The unemployment rate is above the EU average, and Roma children are less likely to finish school. According to EU Fundamental Rights Agency, as many as 54% of Roma still experience discrimination when looking for employment. Too often, Roma are the victims of prejudice, intolerance and social exclusion. Joint EU and national level action is helping, but genuine progress, the sort that will help not just future generations of Roma, but this generation, requires something much more fundamental than what is in place today: a change in public attitudes towards Roma communities. That is far easier said than done. Honourable members, there are 3 concrete steps that we can take to improve public awareness and understanding, all of which are included in the Council's recommendation of December 2013. First, tackling prejudice and discrimination head-on. This is a non-brainer and true for every group facing intolerance. We must take effective measures to combat anti-Gypsyism, negative rhetoric and hate speech. We must fight against racist and stigmatizing language. Second, raising public awareness about Roma people. As we all know, intolerance is a common product of misunderstanding. So improving understanding of Roma communities, not just the problems they face,